Now welcome to another lightning response video, though something tells me this question might lead to something more like a thunderous ramble. Anyway, to get right to it, that question comes to us from Crossfire34, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think the prequel trilogy would have been better if Attack of the Clones was episode 1 and gotten a different episode 2? Okay, so I've always thought that, for better or worse, what The Phantom Menace is or does is take all the major pieces or players or characters and set them on the board and let you know who they are and why this story is about to happen. And it really doesn't seem to do a whole lot more than that at face value, which is why I've seen plenty of people ponder or ask this question about removing it or just starting with Attack of the Clones. In other words, it does seem like you could just start the trilogy with Attack of the Clones and then have a whole other movie to work with or do something with, which could be set during the Clone Wars. Problem is, when you really stop and think about it, it wouldn't be anywhere near that simple. You couldn't just remove the Phantom Menace and plug Attack of the Clones as is in its place and be good to go. There's actually a lot of setup from the Phantom Menace that would have to be either redone or changed in Attack of the Clones for the film to make sense on its own. And so, for fun here, let's look at some of those things we'd lose with the Phantom Menace, as well as ways to add them back in or fix them in Attack of the Clones, or what we'll now call New Episode 1. And first of all, and maybe most importantly, we lose seeing Anakin's relationship with his mother, or seeing his attachment to her, which plays a big part in his fall to the dark side. And her death and his reaction to it, slaughtering the Tuskens, is his first real step in that direction, the first one down the dark path. And that hits pretty hard in that film because, yes, we see how much he cared for her in The Phantom Menace and how difficult it was for him to leave her behind to go off and begin his training. And thus it's also kind of laying the foundation for resentment towards the Jedi later on. Anakin's mother, as it stands, is extremely important for the whole story, and so we'd either have to find another way to make that death scene with his mother still work by introducing her and his relationship with her another way, or we'd just have to remove it and potentially focus entirely on, and make better, the love story between him and Padme. Have that be more or less the primary and nearly sole reason he eventually falls to the dark side. And I mean, yes, I like how it all plays out with his mother, don't get me wrong. The look on Hayden's face, the music when his mother dies, and then going out and beheading some Tuskens is not to sound sadistic, but it's one of the best and most emotional parts of the whole trilogy. Again, it's a key moment in the fall of Anakin Skywalker, and it works because of the Phantom Menace's setup with his mother. But could we get away without it? I think so, if him and Padme is done right, which I'm not saying the relationship doesn't work at all in the prequels, as is. But I do think it could have been done a bit differently and resulted in something a little better, something that felt a little more natural and genuine. And by removing the Phantom Menace, we remove their first meeting as children.
Are you an angel? What?
And then also the awkward infatuation he has with her. And so when they now first meet in New Episode 1, they don't know each other and she's just another mission to him, no more, no less. One maybe at first he doesn't even want any part of because it doesn't sound as exciting as what he and Kenobi normally do. And we can even start this film off with an example of that excitement and show the bond and friendship between these two. We can catch the tail end of some exciting mission Anakin and Obi-Wan are on with some cool lightsaber action and all that. And afterwards they get called back to Coruscant and given the Padme assignment. And then when Anakin eventually gets sent off with Padme when they go on the run together from assassins, instead of something that resembles a romantic getaway at a palace in the lake country of one of the most beautiful planets in the galaxy, that features picnics in wide open fields and dinners where Padme is dressed rather interestingly. Have them truly on the run and in constant danger on backwater planets and have it be a real test for Anakin's abilities. Have these assassins be persistent and the stress of the situation on both of them starts to bring them together. They start to trust and rely on and care about each other. And we don't need them professing their undying love to each other in this film either, or getting married right away at the end, because we again have a whole other middle movie to work with to really cement their relationship. Another important thing we lose with the Phantom Menace is Qui-Gon Jinn and the way he kind of contrasts against the other Jedi to let us know something is not quite right with them, that the Jedi Order is rather dogmatic or set in their ways. And this is where we could have Count Dooku sort of filling the role of Qui-Gon Jinn and getting an expanded and more important role overall. Have it be where he, Dooku, was Obi-Wan's master, and during Kenobi's investigation to find the assassin that is after Padme, or the mastermind behind it all, he goes to Dooku for help, who is now still in the Jedi Order at this point. And we learn how Dooku has become disenfranchised with the Council, and he thinks they've lost their way, and he's essentially separated himself from them and is kind of doing his own thing. He can be the one who tells us about the will of the Force and all of that good stuff. We'll then ultimately see that Dooku is leading Kenobi to the clone army and into somehow starting the war, though we won't see that or have it truly revealed to us till the bitter end. We'll think Dooku is a good guy and is only trying to help the whole time. In fact, it can then be Padme and Anakin that somehow discover that the mastermind is actually Dooku, and they will first find the Separatist army, and maybe Kenobi ultimately ends up trying to save them instead of the other way around. I don't know, I'm just throwing some ideas out there and not trying to fully form the story. Either way, it could make the encounter between Dooku and Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end of the movie have a bit more impact or emotional weight. Especially if Obi-Wan doesn't want to believe and doesn't initially believe that Dooku could possibly be the traitor, or he has to somehow pick between trusting Dooku and Anakin. Kind of going along with this, something else we lose with No Phantom Menace is Darth Maul and the story of how Palpatine becomes the Supreme Chancellor, as well as Palpatine's sort of backstory about how he'll do whatever he has to do, even use his own people to gain power. And I mean, episode 1 is called The Phantom Menace because it shows us the growing threat of Palpatine behind the scenes or in the shadows. Along with this, we also lose this implication at the end of The Phantom Menace that Palpatine and Anakin will potentially become friends, which they of course do.
And you, young Skywalker, we will watch your career with great interest.
And that's an important friendship. Palpatine is kind of like a father figure to Anakin, and it plays a big part in his choice in Revenge of the Sith to turn on Windu and spare him. And so what we could do to begin to rectify some of those problems is to see things a bit from Palpatine's perspective. I mean, if you know about Star Wars going into the prequels, you knew Palpatine was going to be the big bad guy. So how the films keep it, in a sense, a secret isn't all that necessary. Now I get some, especially nowadays, will start by watching the prequels and they'll know little or nothing about Star Wars, and they may find it surprising to learn that Palpatine is the big bad guy. But if we're going to skip the Phantom Menace and already have him as the Supreme Chancellor, let's just lay it all out in plain sight and let it be known he's got some dark machinations going on and is the one behind it all. Flat out show him manipulating events and speaking with some shadowy holographic figure throughout the film, who, yeah, turns out to be Dooku in the end. And perhaps in this version, Dooku wears some type of mask with voice modulation, so we don't immediately recognize the very iconic voice of Christopher Lee and put 2 and 2 together and ruin the surprise that Dooku is the Sith apprentice. Though it could also be interesting if somehow Dooku is the Sith master at this point, but let's not try to work that into the story and essentially erase Darth Plagueis. However, I do think that is an interesting idea.
Ironic.
Anyway, what we're again trying to do with all this is let us see some of Palpatine's machinations, as well as let us know something is wrong with the Jedi Order, that someone like Dooku, with seemingly good intentions, has fallen to the dark side because of it. And with it being Anakin who uncovers that Dooku was the mastermind all along, it could give Palpatine a reason to befriend Anakin to still set up Revenge of the Sith. Yet another thing we'd lose almost by default is the prophecy of the Chosen One. And honestly, coming from someone who, as yesterday's video pointed out, someone who can remember the original trilogy before the prequels, well, the prophecy is something that very much feels like an after-the-fact idea or an insert after the fact, rather than something that was always on George's mind. And it's something that I've never really either loved or hated. It's just there, and I'm fine with it. In other words, I don't have a problem with just implying Anakin was a particularly skilled Jedi, for whatever reason, who just so happened to be trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi and gets singled out by Palpatine somehow. That there's nothing more to the story than that. I mean, you could still try to work in the prophecy even without the Phantom Menace if you really wanted to, but in this hypothetical, I think I'd probably leave it out for simplicity's sake. Another thing that would kind of be left out by default is Jar Jar Binks, and as we know, he does play an important role when he proposes granting emergency powers to Palpatine, though I think part of the reason why that scene works is because we know Jar Jar is being used. He's kind of the useful idiot in that scenario, and though we could include him or another character like him to fill that same role, I honestly think we could just kind of do without all that. There's then plenty of other little things that the Phantom Menace establishes, like introducing R2 and 3PO and showing their first meeting, but those are things that I think could be added back in a different way easily enough. And off the top of my head, I think I've covered all the major things that would need to be addressed, but again, probably plenty of other smaller things I'm not even thinking about right now. And so to get back to the initial question, would the prequels be better if they started with episode 2? I mean, I like the Phantom Menace and all that. I'm fine that that's where the prequels start, but sure, potentially, I guess. I mean, it would all depend on how or what changes were made to Attack of the Clones and what the new episode 2 would look like. But I think that's all a discussion for another time if people have interest in me going any further into all this. Well, that's all I got for this time, though now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about my ideas, or the idea of removing the Phantom Menace. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you somewhere in between? Or you can always ask me a question for a future lightning response video. Just start your comment off with "Hey Thor" to grab my attention. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.